I'd lost my confidence to go out, so I'd get panic attacks and things like that, which was new. I mean, it was a new experience for me. That guilt will always rest with me, and I know deep down it wasn't my fault, but I just wasn't there at that final moment, and it really hurts.
You struggled in those initial days to cry, or?
I'd been brought up not to cry.
Hello, I'm Hannah and welcome to the Life and Loss podcast, where we discuss difficult topics including living with life-limiting illnesses, dying, death and bereavement. Today I'm joined by Caroline, whose husband Des was cared for at Forest Holme Hospice after he passed away from a life-limiting illness in 2014. In this episode, we'll talk about navigating grief within stoic families that uphold the stiff upper lip mentality, and we'll focus on the challenge of being unable to cry when someone dies. We'll also discuss how grief can impact a person's physical health. So welcome, Caroline. Thank you for joining me today. Can you tell me a little bit about Des, or a Chick as I know you like to call him?
Well, Des, or Chick, I'd like to call him Chick, was quite an unusual man. He was a Gemini, not that I'm anyone to comment on everybody being Gemini being the same, but he was on the one hand very, very soft as butter, on the other hand he was really quite tough, and the Chick nickname came from his years in the Royal Marines. As a very young man he became a Royal Marine Commando, and I think that early start in many respects made him the man he became, and certainly made him the stoic, self-disciplined, self-motivated man that I knew. But underneath he was really, really soft, and some people never saw that side of him. He was an extremely interesting man and had many, many different interests. And one of the happy memories that I like to think about is that, you know, sometimes when you go into a restaurant and the room's full of couples, and some of them will be engaging in conversation, others will just be staring at each other blankly and don't seem to have anything to say. Well, Chick and I were very much the former. We always had something to say to each other. We never short of something interesting to share. We shared quite a lot of interests in common, one of which was military history, which since he's gone I found quite difficult because my contemporaries as older ladies find that weird, so I never mention it. But similarly, we had interests apart from each other, which again means that you've always got something to talk about, really. But he was in my life in one form or another for 40 years. So when I lost him, it was a big, big shake-up. And we had an interesting life together, which sort of fitted in a bit with his personality. There were quite a few ups and downs, not necessarily in our relationship, but events which impacted on our relationship. And that, I think, made our relationship quite a lot stronger, but also sort of toughened us both up a bit, really.
And when did you realise that he was unwell? When did he first start showing symptoms?
Well, it was quite a complicated path, really, because he was a very fit man. His Royal Marine background, he looked after himself. He ate well. He kept physically fit, mentally fit. I mean, he was a fit man. But he was waiting for a hip replacement, which is a normal thing at his age. And when we went in for the pre-op, it was a huge, huge shock when it was found out that he'd got a huge congenital heart defect involving scrambled up arteries and things. And of course they wouldn't do the hip operation until he'd had major heart surgery. So he had to wait about 4 months for that, and it had to be done in London by a particular surgeon who was skilled in that type of procedure. Anyway, bless him, he went through that. We went through that. He recovered well. They couldn't believe how fit he was, how motivated he was to get better. And once he was better from that, he had the hip surgery and he recovered well from that. A matter of few months after he had the hip surgery, he started to have all manner of different symptoms, aches and pains, nausea, funny bruises appearing on his body, quite random, different symptoms. The result of that was that we were sent off to loads of different specialisms, urology, orthopedic, all sorts of different things, because nobody could quite figure out what was wrong with him. His gallbladder disintegrated. I mean, all sorts of weird things happened. And it took a really long time to diagnose a very rare cancer, which is angiosarcoma. And that is a cancer of the blood vessels. So without knowing almost, it travels around your body and it's very difficult to track it. So the upshot of that was, by the time it was diagnosed, they couldn't do anything about it because it was all over him, all over his body. And so we were given a terminal diagnosis at that point. And they tried a bit of radiotherapy, but that made him really ill, so they stopped that. And so we settled down to living with his condition. So for the last few months of his life, we never talked about it being an end-of-life situation. He never spoke about that. But he carried on being his normal, cheerful, stoic, very, very amenable. He was the most amenable patient. He was fantastic for me. It was very hard work, and in a way, that sort of brought us together because he required a lot of care in those final months.
And did you get any help from anyone from the hospice?
Well, here we come to Forest Holme Hospice, the wonderful Forest Holme Hospice, because he was in and out of hospital quite a bit. This was, I suppose, about 3 months before he died. And at that point, he was in Poole Hospital when it was suggested that he might benefit from some outpatient care initially at Forest Holme. And so we went, and we were under the care of Dr. Saskia Dorman, who was wonderful. I mean, she was just great. And so we went once a week to see her and have a chat and one thing and another. And looking back, I think what happened was we went for our normal weekly appointment with Saskia, and I parked right outside her window, because you'll know hers is on the ground floor. And I think she must have seen what a struggle it was getting him in and out of the car, and how difficult he found it getting into the appointment, basically. And it was at that appointment that she suggested that he came into the hospice for pain relief initially. Looking back, I think obviously these, they're experts. I think they recognised the end was close, and that was a way of getting him in the hospice so that he could be cared for. And it was wonderful because he was in there for 3 weeks in the end. And although it seems a strange thing to say, we had the quality of our life for those last 3 weeks was amazing, thanks to the care of the hospice, because all I had to do was just sit there with him. We chatted, we watched television. I didn't have to do anything else while I was there with him, and it was just fantastic.
I've heard that a lot, actually. People say that you spend so long caring for that person.
Yes.
But then when you come into the hospice, you can be the wife again, or you can be the daughter again.
Exactly. Everything else doesn't matter for those times, that very, very difficult and important time when you're together.
We will take a moment to pause whilst you reflect on your own experience of loss. If you feel able, share your thoughts by commenting below. We hope that through sharing this personal experience, you will feel less alone with your grief. And what about the moment when Chick actually died at the hospice? What were your initial emotions that you experienced?
My initial feeling was guilt because I wasn't actually there at the moment he died. I think this is a very common feeling, and this is, whilst I've moved on, let's say, or haven't moved on, I've learned to deal with life and made a sort of a new life in the subsequent 9 years. That guilt will always rest with me, and it really, I know deep down it wasn't my fault, but I just wasn't there at that final moment, and it really hurts. Shock. I mean, I'd lost both my mother and my father under very, very different circumstances. But it's strange that the shock of a bereavement is always the same.
Yeah.
Because one day they're there and the next day they're gone. Initially, there's a lot to do. So I felt quite driven, and I felt urged. I wanted to do a respectful funeral and involve the people who needed to be in that event. Once, I suppose I didn't want to talk about him very much at that point. I just felt quite sort of empty. But once the funeral was over, I felt completely useless because I'd been so involved in his care. We'd been such a team, if you like. We'd been a team throughout our relationship, but we'd really been a team in his last few months. And all of a sudden, he wasn't there anymore, and I'd got a huge gap to fill.
Absolutely. And what about, I know you've mentioned previously, you struggled in those initial days to cry, or...
I'd been brought up not to cry. I think this is very significant. My father was a Japanese prisoner of war.
Oh, right.
And so my brother and I, and my poor mum as well, in fact, who met my father after the war, so she didn't know the man before the war. We were not expected to cry or show emotion much. If anything happened, we just expected to get on. And of course also, I mean, apart from my father's particular circumstance, I'm a baby boomer, if you like.
Yes.
I'm being born not that long after the war. There was still, the Blitz mentality, the Dunkirk spirit, all that sort of stuff, where I come from a generation, in some respects, who was expected just to get on and put up with whatever happened.
Yeah.
And so there was that, which was quite strong. And I remembered in my teen years, I had a few wobbles, because I think teenage years are extremely difficult.
Yes.
And I had a few wobbles then. And my dad, I felt that he disapproved if I cried very much or got a bit too upset about stuff and that sort of thing. He was never angry with me, but I could see he wasn't at all comfortable with it. And I suppose in a way, although Chick was much more sympathetic, should I get upset, I tended not to get upset with him because he was so stoic.
Yeah.
He just carried on, and he had quite a few knocks through his life, and he always recovered and just, kept calm and carried on.
Yes.
And there was quite a big element of that in my upbringing, I think.
Yeah, but sometimes it can feel such a relief to cry, can't it? If you've got built-up emotions.
Well, it can. I mean, I think we have to accept that whatever our upbringing or our nurture, as opposed to nature, if you like, we are all different people. And even allowing for what I've just said, some of us show emotion more than others. That's just human nature. But what I found was, because even now, we talk about getting a lump in our throat, you feel a bit tearful and everything, but I always felt I'd got some kind of shutter, which as soon as I felt like that goes, boom, don't do it, contain it.
Yeah.
And so for whatever reason, I had that in my mentality. And in the weeks following his death, I sort of didn't want to embarrass my friends by crying in front of them and that sort of thing. I somehow thought they wouldn't be able to handle it.
It made them feel uncomfortable.
Yes, I was worried that might happen, because I'm lucky I've got lots of good friends. And even my daughters, I remember one occasion where music is one of the things I find really, really helpful when stress builds up. And I was with both my daughters when the wrong or the right piece of music came on, and I started to cry. And I remember one of them saying to the other, "Oh my God, Mummy's crying, what shall we do?" So even that was difficult. I was quite contained.
Yeah. And did you notice any other effects of the grief on your physical health or on your behaviour?
Absolutely. I was dreaming an awful lot, mainly about him. I often felt quite sick. I lost my confidence to go out. I would frequently lie in bed and, I suppose I had palpitations. I'd get panic attacks and things like that, which was new. I mean, it was a new experience for me.
Yeah, it must have been quite distressing to have all of that. Did you think that there was something wrong with you as well, or did you?
Well, I wondered if there might be, but 16 months after Chick died, I had 2 mini strokes.
Oh, right.
And when I went into hospital, I mean, I'm a fit person. I mean, I look after myself. I've had good training. I had these mini strokes, and the doctors said that they thought it was down to suppressed bereavement stress at that point.
Right.
Following that, I decided that I needed to take myself in hand a little bit more. I'm not, at my age, I'm not going to suddenly become a different person.
No.
But I do now recognise the signs in my body, the danger signs, if you like, in my body, when I know my blood pressure's going up and I start to feel a bit dizzy and sometimes a bit sick. And I now know how to deal with that, because obviously that is a significant health issue as you get older, that to keep all those things under control a bit.
Yeah.
And I now know the sort of things I can do to help myself. One of them, as I say, is music. If I need to, I know what music to put on that will make me cry. And crying is the most incredible stress relief, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is.
I mean, it really, you just sort of, everything relaxes somehow. And I'll often do that to cry. If once I've done that, I feel better. The other things which lift my spirits and therefore make me feel much better, unlike some people, I like to revisit places we went to together. I derive pleasure from the memories I have from that. Chick used to push me quite a lot outside my comfort zone, and he always said to me, right to the very end, you must keep making memories. So I try and do things. Very often I'll choose things I think he might like as well, and then I'll think how much he might have liked it. So music is a key thing. I do new things and share them with him in my heart, in my head, if you like. I've got huge help from being involved with the hospice, because shortly after he died, I became a fundraising volunteer initially for the hospice, which I've now been for 8 years. And I've made loads of new friends, and I've just loved it. It's been really great for me. And more recently, I've been involved with bereavement support at the hospice, which is amazingly rewarding. And it is a fact, I think, as you get older, as you get to my age, I love my daughters very much, but they both live abroad, so I don't see them that much, or my grandchildren. You can feel extremely useless. I mean, it's a real problem as you get old. And it really helps me to feel that if I help one person by sharing my experiences and showing them that I've learnt to deal with living with loss, if I can just help one person realise that there is hope and you can deal with it, that helps me. The crying, the music, whenever I well up, I try and release that tension with music, because
Yes.
I know I recognise stress signs in my body, and I now am much better at knowing how to deal with them.
And when you say music, do you mean songs that remind you of your marriage, or are they?
Sometimes that. Not necessarily always that. I mean, a lot of them are songs that remind me of him. Some of them, I like all sorts of music. I've got a very wide taste of music, ranging through from classical to jazz and 60s, I mean, everything in between. And so a lot of the songs do remind me of him, but others are just ones that make me feel good.
Yes, yeah.
They just make me feel good. And I am known to have a little kitchen disco from time to time, where I've got a 60s, early 70s playlist, and I'll put that on and I'll have a dance, because he was a great dancer, and that was something that we really enjoyed doing together.
Yeah.
So kitchen discos, one song that really sets me off is a song, you're too young probably to remember, La Mer by Charles Trenet, and it's been covered by all sorts of other people, Robbie Williams. And my elder daughter lives in France, and Chick and I ran a campsite in France for a while, so I've got a huge love affair with France. And he sings it in French, and the melody is just, it's just so emotional.
I'll have to listen to that one.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Caroline, and you have helped so many people just by sharing your story and helping with various things we do at the hospice. So you certainly have a purpose.
Well, I do hope so.
And are valued. So thank you very much. And thank you very much for listening today to the Life and Loss podcast. If you'd like more information on the charity, you can visit our website, which is www.forestholmehospice.org.uk. Thank you. Grief is a journey that none of us should navigate alone. If today's interview resonated with you, or if you know someone who could benefit from hearing it, I'd encourage you to subscribe and share this podcast. By spreading the word, you help us to reach others who may be grieving, letting them know that they're not alone and that there's a community here to support them.